My wife betrayed me with my best friend, and walked out of court with everything. The judge gave her our $3.4 million Fairfield mansion. You're pathetic, she whispered, as she left with my best friend that night. Sleeping in my truck, I got a call from Geneva. We've been trying to reach you for years. The account number they read held exactly $47 million. But then, what they said shocked me. It all started when I walked out of that courthouse. I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I just stood there, feeling 30 years of sweat, sacrifice, and loyalty collapse in a single breath. My whole life gone. In that moment, I thought that was the worst thing that could ever happen to me. I stood on the courthouse steps, my head heavy, my stomach in knots. Rachel had walked away with everything. The house, the savings, the life we built together. And Eddie, my best friend, the one man I thought I could always count on. Together, they left with everything I'd ever worked for, and I stood there, alone. I didn't know where to go. I didn't know what to do. My pride was shattered. My body felt like it was made of stone. So, I did what felt like the only thing left. I drove aimlessly out of town, and ended up behind a diner off Highway 22. In a small parking lot. The smell of grease and stale coffee lingered in the air, but it didn't matter. It was the only place that felt empty enough to hold the weight of what I'd just lost. I slouched in the front seat of my truck, staring at the cracked ceiling, thinking that maybe I had nothing left to give. Then, just before midnight, the phone rang. I almost didn't answer. I thought it was probably some debt collector, or maybe another reminder of what I couldn't pay, but something told me to pick it up, maybe just to break the silence. Mr. Caldwell, a calm, European voice asked. I sat up straight. Yes. This is Simon Keller, from Gallon Private Banking Group in Geneva, he said. We've been trying to reach you for several years. I felt my heartbeat quicken. My uncle, Walter Hale, the name hit me like a punch to the gut. I hadn't thought about him in years. Was the odd one in the family. Fancy scarves, strange stories about places I'd never been. He disappeared when I was in my 20s. No one really knew what happened to him. Some said he'd moved to Europe, others said he'd died. But now, here was someone asking about him. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. What's this about? I asked, the words coming out like they didn't belong to me. Simon paused for a moment before continuing. We have a dormant account in your name. Your uncle Walter established it some time ago, and it's only recently that we've been able to make contact. Dormant account. I echoed, my head spinning. What kind of account? The pause on the other end stretched for a beat too long before Simon said, the current balance is $47,892,420.77. I almost dropped the phone. 47 million. My mouth went dry. And I struggled to catch my breath. I stared at the dashboard, unable to focus on anything. That couldn't be right. It didn't make sense. I was just a man who'd spent his life working with his hands. Who'd trusted the wrong people and ended up with nothing. How could I suddenly have this? Why is this? Why is this just now coming to me? I managed to ask. Your uncle left very specific instructions. Simon said, his voice still calm. The account was only to be released under one condition. What condition? I pressed. The condition was that you were no longer legally bound by marriage. My heart skipped a beat. The air felt thick in my lungs. It was like the world had just shifted beneath me. What did that even mean? No longer legally bound. Yes, Mr. Caldwell. It's a trust designed to protect you. It could only be accessed once you were free from your marriage. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. The weight of his words didn't hit me all at once. It wasn't just the money. It was the realization that somehow someone, my uncle, of all people, had seen this coming. Had known that the life I thought was secure would shatter, and left me something that could rebuild everything I'd lost. Something that had been waiting for this exact moment. I cleared my throat. How do I get this? Simon continued calmly. You'll need to come to Geneva for identity verification and document processing. Ainlay couleurs montples. All travel and accommodations will be arranged. Once everything is confirmed, we can transfer the funds wherever you choose. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel completely crushed. I felt something else. Something unfamiliar. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was just disbelief. I sat in the dark truck, staring at the diner's neon lights flickering in the distance. Inco length hour? In a matter of hours, everything could change. But even as I sat there, unsure of what to do next, I knew one thing for sure. I was no longer the man I was when I walked out of that courtroom. The man who had nothing left. Now, I had a choice. A choice to rebuild. I hadn't thought about my Uncle Walter in years. He was the black sheep of the family, always the one who didn't fit in. Fancy scarves. Expensive tastes, stories about places none of us had ever heard of. Each were here. Disappeared when I was in my 20s, and from that point on, no one really knew what happened to him. Some said he'd moved to Europe. Anlifer. Others whispered he died. But there I was, sitting in my truck behind that diner, hearing his name again. The call from Geneva wasn't just a phone call. Han. It was a reminder that life could still surprise you. That things weren't as over as I thought. When Simon said my uncle had left me an inheritance, I didn't know what to think. My hands trembled as I put the phone down. $47 million. I barely understood it. I didn't even know how to process it. The world I knew was a world of hard work, sacrifice, loyalty. The life I'd built with Rachel. My best friend Eddie, the house, everything, it was all gone in an instant. And now, suddenly, there was this. This money. This chance. I didn't know what I was supposed to do with it. I spent the rest of the night staring at the dashboard, watching the diner's neon lights flicker. My mind was racing. I didn't go to sleep. I couldn't. I kept thinking about my life, how it had been before, how it was now, how it had all fallen apart so quickly, how Rachel, the woman I loved, the one I had given everything to, in his family had ankle-length hair, had destroyed everything we'd built together. She wasn't just taking the house, the savings, the life we'd had. She took my belief that hard work and loyalty would mean something. The next morning, I drove back to my mother's house. The place where I grew up, the cracked steps and the front porch where my mother had taught me about pride. A place so far removed from the world I'd been living in for the last few years. When I walked in, and the smell of fresh coffee and old furniture hit me like it always did. My mother looked up from her knitting, smiled, and said, "You look like you've been through a storm." I didn't say much. I didn't know what to say. I sat down in a tantere. Down at the kitchen table, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. My life had been so simple once. I built houses. I ran crews. I worked with my hands. That was my identity. But somewhere along the way, it all changed. Money came into the picture. And with it. So did the empty promises. I had thought I was building something solid. Something that would last. But it didn't. It all crumbled. My mother didn't ask questions. She just handed me a cup of coffee. The same way she had when I was a boy. She never needed much. She didn't care for fancy things. She was the kind of woman who taught me that life wasn't measured by what you could buy but by what stayed standing. But even she could see how much had fallen apart for me. I was broken. But when I told her about the phone call from Geneva, she didn't gasp. She didn't even raise an eyebrow. She just nodded. That man always knew more than he let on. Maybe now you can breathe. Her words hit me harder than I expected. Maybe she was right. Maybe I could breathe again. But I wasn't sure if I wanted to. Emily, my daughter, had been quiet about everything. She was 23 now, sharp as a knife. Stubborn like her mother. But with a heart of gold. She had spent so much of her childhood trailing behind me at job sites, learning about hard work and self-reliance. When I told her about the inheritance, she didn't ask for anything. She didn't ask for money. She just said, "Dad, you deserve this. But don't let it change the good parts of you." Those words stuck with me. They stayed with me in a way that nothing else had for a long time. I was still processing the phone call when I booked the flight to Geneva. I didn't tell Rachel. I didn't tell Eddie. Each woman his family had and deserved to know about my future. I had no intention of letting them be a part of what was coming next. For the first time in months, I felt like I was finally moving toward something. It was a chance to rebuild myself, and to find something that had been lost. I wasn't sure what it was, but I knew it had to be more than just the money. I packed my bag and headed to the airport, my thoughts heavy with what lay ahead. The flight felt long, but in some strange way, each woman in his family had ankle-length hair. It felt like I was flying into a different life, one that didn't have the weight of betrayal hanging over it. I wasn't the man I had been. But I didn't know who I was yet. I just knew that something had to change. When the plane landed in Geneva, everything felt different. The air was colder, sharper, higher ankle-length hair, and the streets were clean and quiet. I could feel the distance between me and the life I'd just left behind. As I stepped off the plane, I was greeted by a driver, his face unreadable, his eyes focused ahead. He didn't speak much. Which was fine. By me. My thoughts were loud enough. We drove through the city, past old stone buildings. And I felt a weight settle in my chest. This was it. This was the moment. The moment where I could either stay stuck in the life I had been living, or start something new. Something real. I wasn't sure which path I'd take yet, but I was starting to feel like I had a choice. When I drove home that day, my hands were shaking. My mind was spinning with the reality of what I had just discovered. I was angry, confused, and still in shock from the phone call. But nothing prepared me for what I was about to see. I had always trusted Eddie. We'd been best friends for over 30 years. Each woman in his family had ankle-length hair. We hunted together, built things together, drank beer under the stars, and talked about life like we had all the time in the world. I never questioned his loyalty. He was the one person I thought I could always count on. And Rachel. Well, she was my wife. The woman I'd spent my life building with. I believed in us, in what we had. But that Thursday, that day I came home early, everything changed. I had been out on a job site in Syracuse, working late. My body ached from the physical labor. But I was looking forward to seeing Rachel, maybe reconnecting. Each woman his family had ankle of her favorite bakeries in White Plains. And picked up a cannoli, hoping it would be a small surprise to brighten her day. Maybe I was fooling myself, but I thought if I could just get her to sit down with me, we could talk like we used to, like when we were happy. I pulled into the driveway, and immediately, something felt off. It was quiet. Too quiet. The house looked still. Like it was holding its breath. Eddie's truck was parked near the garage. Not unusual, but something felt wrong. The air was too thick, the silence too loud. I parked the truck, took a deep breath, and got out. I walked past the kitchen, and then I heard it. A laugh. Soft and familiar. Rachel's laugh. The one she used to give me when we were on the porch. Eating sandwiches, talking about our future. That laugh used to make my heart race with warmth. But now, it sent a chill through me. I walked slowly, carefully, toward the stairs. My feet felt like they were dragging. But I couldn't stop. I had to know. When I reached the top of the stairs, I hesitated. I didn't want to open that door. And when I did, everything I thought I knew about my life shattered. There they were, sitting there in my bedroom. Rachel, casually crossing her legs, her hair falling over her shoulder, and Eddie, fumbling for his shirt. Neither of them looked panicked. Neither of them scrambled to hide what was happening. They just sat there, like they were waiting for me. Rachel looked up at me and said, "You're early." The words hit me like a freight train. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. Each woman sighed in silence. Between us, stretched for what felt like hours, but it was only a few seconds. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I didn't even say a word. I just turned around, and walked out of the room. Down the stairs. Out the front door. I went to the garage. And sat on a stack of plywood, staring at the walls, at the nothingness around me. My hands were numb. My heart was silent. Silent. That night, I couldn't sleep. The world felt wrong, like I was living someone else's life. I kept replaying the scene in my head, over and over. How could this happen? How could Eddie, the one person who was always there for me, do this to me? How could Rachel, the woman I'd given everything to, betray me like this? I never saw it coming, not in a million years. The next morning, Rachel filed for divorce. I didn't even have time to process what had happened. Before everything started moving too fast. She hired the best lawyer money could buy. Donna Oven. A man with a smile that could cut through steel. He didn't need to yell. He didn't need to get emotional. He just twisted everything. He painted me as the cold, distant husband who didn't know how to love. He pulled out old text messages from years ago. Messages that were taken out of context, and used them against me.
He dragged it up.
Old business disputes. Things that didn't even matter anymore. And made it sound like they defined my character. I sat in that courtroom. My hands gripping the edge of my chair so tightly my fingers turned white. I listened as Donovan turned my life into a story. A story where I was the villain, and Rachel, my wife of 30 years, was the victim. It was all lies. But it didn't matter. He had the power, the smooth words. The manipulation. Rachel didn't cry. She didn't even pretend to be upset. She sat there in a black dress, her legs crossed, acting like she owned the place. Every time she turned her head, it was with the cold confidence of someone who knew they had already won. And then Emily spoke. My daughter. She was the only one who tried to defend me. She said. My mom changed. Not my dad. Rachel didn't even look at her. She didn't care. She didn't even blink. And that was the moment that hurt more than anything else. Seeing my daughter realize that her mother cared more about winning than about her own child. It was like a knife to the chest. I couldn't protect her from it. I couldn't shield her from the truth. And that moment stayed with me. A constant reminder of the woman I thought I knew. The divorce went by quickly after that. 9 months of hearings, statements, accusations, distortions, all of it. Sargently here. The judge awarded Rachel the mansion, most of our savings, half the retirement, and spousal support on top of it. I walked away with my tools, my truck, and a small apartment that didn't feel like home. The last thing Rachel said to me, as she left with Eddie, was whispered in my ear. You're pathetic. And those words, they stayed with me. They echoed in my mind like a curse I couldn't shake. But I couldn't let it define me. Not anymore. The days after the courtroom were a blur. I could hardly make sense of what had just happened. Hart had ankle-length hair. Rachel had one. And I was left with a small apartment that felt more like a reminder of everything I had lost than a place to call home. I had tried to stay strong. But it was hard. Everywhere I looked, it felt like she was still there. Like I couldn't escape the ghost of my past life. I didn't go back to the apartment that day. I couldn't. The white walls felt too sterile, too empty. I needed to clear my head, to think. So, I drove north, aimlessly, the wheels of my truck eating up the miles without any destination in mind. I ended up parked behind that diner off Highway 20. Again. The same spot. The same quiet. But this time, I wasn't alone. In my thoughts, my mind kept racing, running over every single detail of the divorce, the betrayal, the lies. Each woman in his family had ankle length. I'll help but replay that moment in the courtroom, when Rachel's lawyer tore me apart, twisting the truth to suit their narrative. The accusations. The claims. I was made out to be the villain in our story. A cold and distant husband who never cared. I couldn't defend myself. Every time I opened my mouth, it felt like I was sinking deeper into a hole I couldn't climb out of. And the worst part, Rachel didn't even care. She wasn't broken. She wasn't upset. She just sat there, cold and composed, like she was already done with me. She'd moved on the moment I wasn't useful to her anymore. My daughter, Emily, was the only one who tried to fight for me. I will never forget the way she stood up and said, my mom changed. Not my dad. But Rachel didn't even acknowledge her. She didn't look at her once. It was like ankle length. Emily wasn't even there. It stung more than anything else. The woman I'd loved and trusted had betrayed me, and now, she was willing to sacrifice our daughter for her own gain. I sat in my truck that night, staring at the flickering diner sign, feeling the weight of everything. I wanted to. But I didn't. Instead, I just sat there, numb. It was the only thing I could do. Then, the phone rang. At first. I didn't even want to pick it up. I figured it was some debt collector, or another reminder of what I couldn't afford. But something told me to answer. Maybe I was just desperate for any kind of distraction. Maybe I wanted to hear a voice that wasn't my own. Mr. Caldwell. A calm voice said on the other end. I straightened up. Yes. This is Simon Keller with Gallon Private Banking Group in Geneva. He continued. We've been trying to reach you for several years. I froze. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. My uncle, Walter Hale. The man who had disappeared from our lives decades ago. I'm listening, I said, my voice tight. Simon's voice remained steady. We've located a dormant account in your name, established by your late uncle. It has a balance of $47,892,421.77. The words didn't immediately register. 47 million. It felt like a joke. But the more he spoke, the more I realized this wasn't a joke. It was real. Are you sure? I asked, still struggling to comprehend it. Simon assured me it was legitimate. He explained that the account had been set up specifically for me, to be accessed only after a certain condition had been met. The condition. I needed to be free from my marriage. I leaned back in my seat, the reality of it all starting to sink in. This wasn't just some windfall. It was my uncle's plan, a plan I didn't even know existed. What do I need to do? I asked. My voice hoarse. You'll need to come to Geneva for identity verification and document processing, Simon explained. Once we've confirmed everything, the funds can be transferred to an account of your choosing. I sat there for a moment, speechless. What did I do with $47 million? How did I even process it? My life had just fallen apart, and now, somehow, I was supposed to rebuild it, with money I hadn't even earned. I'll need some time, I told Simon, my voice steadying. I didn't know what I was supposed to do with this information. But I knew one thing, I needed to think. After the call I just sat there in the truck, staring at the dark parking lot. It felt surreal. I had just lost everything, and now I was being given a chance to rebuild. But how? What kind of man would I be with this kind of wealth? I thought about Rachel, about Eddie, about everything they'd taken from me. I thought about how I had always believed that hard work, loyalty, and honesty were enough. That's what my mother taught me. That's what I had tried to teach Emily. But now, here I was, facing something I didn't understand. I looked at the road ahead of me. There was no going back. Not to the life I had before. It was gone. But maybe, just maybe, I could start something new. I drove back to my mother's house. I didn't tell her about the call. I didn't know how to explain it. But when I walked inside, she didn't ask questions. She just looked at me and said, maybe now you can breathe. It felt like a heavy weight had been lifted. But I knew it was only the beginning. The flight to Geneva felt like a blur. Each woman in his hair. The world outside the plane window was dark. The lights of cities, below like tiny flecks of gold scattered across the vastness. My mind was 1,000 miles away, and yet, all I could think about was how quickly everything had shifted. Just days ago, I was sitting in a courtroom, watching my life disintegrate. And now, I was on my way to Europe. I had never asked for, never imagined. I tried to sleep, but the reality of it all kept creeping in. $47 million. I kept hearing Simon's voice on the phone, reading the balance from that dormant account. It didn't feel real. It still didn't. It felt like something out of a movie, a story, where the hero, the man who has lost everything, suddenly finds out he's been given everything. But I wasn't sure if I even wanted it. I didn't know what I was supposed to do with it. The only thing I was sure of was that I needed to rebuild my life, but it wasn't going to be about the money. It had to be something more. I didn't want to become a man defined by what he owned. I didn't want to be. I didn't want to be the kind of man Rachel had turned me into, someone who thought that success and status could fix everything. Each woman in his family had ankle-length hair. No, I needed to find a way back to the man I used to be, the one who could look at himself in the mirror and know he was still standing. I was still worthy, despite the world crashing down around him. When I landed in Geneva, the air was colder than I expected, sharp against my skin. The city was quieter than I thought it would be, the streets clean and empty, buildings towering over me like silent giants. The driver was waiting for me, holding a sign with my name. He didn't speak much, just nodded when I got in, and we set off in the sleek black car, weaving through the narrow streets. The buildings passed by in a blur, old stone buildings with faded history. And I felt out of place, like a man who didn't belong in this world. But still, there I was. We drove past a lake, its surface a deep, glassy blue, reflecting the gray sky. The landscape was beautiful, in a way I couldn't quite put into words, and still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being in the wrong place. This wasn't my world. But maybe it was about time I stepped into a new one. The car stopped in front of a tall, imposing building with iron gates and gold lettering. The Gallon Private Banking Group. Atried had ankle-length hair. It looked less like a bank, and more like a fortress, a place where secrets were kept. A place that didn't belong to men, like me. The driver opened the door for me. And I stepped out, feeling the chill of the air, again. Inside, it smelled like leather and polish. The floors gleaming beneath my feet. A receptionist guided me down a long hallway. Past portraits of stern-looking men in suits, all staring at me as if they knew my story, even though I was a stranger to them. The hallway felt endless, the silence almost oppressive. Until we reached a large office, at the end of the hall. The man waiting for me was older, maybe in his 60s, with silver hair and a warm smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He shook my hand firmly. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, his voice calm and controlled. "Welcome." "Thank you," I said, my voice hoarse. He gestured for me to sit. The office felt more like a library than a financial institution. Books lined the walls, a massive globe sat in the corner, and a polished desk sat at the center, papers neatly arranged on top of it. Simon Keller took a seat across from me, pulling out a thick folder from his desk. "Your uncle was an extraordinary man," he began, flipping through the pages. "Complicated, private, but brilliant in his financial strategy. He didn't leave much to chance, Mr. Caldwell." I nodded, not knowing what to say. Walter had always been the mystery of our family. The one who wore silk scarves and talked about things we couldn't understand. He had money, but he never showed it off. He was different. And now, he was gone, and somehow, he had set all of this up for me. Sommel Dankel. Someone soothed the folder toward me, the papers inside looking official. The kind of documents that felt too important for someone like me. "Here's the breakdown of the assets your uncle left," Simon continued. "Properties, investments, and, of course, the trust." I picked up The first sheet of paper, my hands shaking slightly. The numbers didn't make sense. How could it? How could art? How'd a man like me, just a regular guy from the construction world, be holding something this monumental? It felt unreal. But it was there in black and white. Walter was a private investor, Simon said, his voice softening slightly. He had a way of seeing things that most others didn't. The assets. Assets were diversified across several countries, and the funds have grown steadily over the years. The current value of the trust is $47 million. I swallowed hard. 47 million. I had worked my whole life to build something, to provide for my family, and here I was, with more money than I could ever spend in a lifetime. But what good was it? What good was any of this if it didn't bring me back the life I had lost? Why did he leave this to me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Why now? Simon paused, letting the silence fill the room before answering. Your uncle's directive was clear. Ankle-length hair. He wanted you to have the opportunity to rebuild, to free yourself from your past, before you could claim what was rightfully yours. Free myself from my past. I understood that now. Rachel. Eddie. Everything I had been through. Each woman in his family had ankle-length hair. My uncle had somehow come in. He had known that I needed to be free of everything, before I could truly move forward. Simon slid a document across the desk. This authorizes the full transfer of all trust assets, he said, looking me in the eye. Once you sign, the funds can be transferred to any account you choose. I stared at the document. I didn't know what to feel. My life was at a crossroads. And this was the moment I had to decide. Would I take this and run with it? Or would I find another way to rebuild without losing who I was? I signed the papers, the weight of it settling over me. This wasn't just a financial transaction. This was a turning point. Each woman, and as I signed my name, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to step into a life I didn't fully understand. I looked at Simon. What now? He smiled. Now, Mr. Caldwell, you start fresh. It's your new beginning. I stood up, shaking his hand once again. As I walked out of the office, I couldn't help but think of Walter. He had seen something in me. Something I hadn't even seen in myself. Maybe now I had the chance to find it. I stayed in Geneva for 2 days, trying to make sense of everything. The days passed slowly, but with each one, I felt a little bit lighter. The weight of what had happened back home still pressed on me. But the more time I spent in this unfamiliar city, the more I started to realize that maybe this wasn't just about the money. Maybe it was about something else. Something deeper. I walked around the city each day, trying to clear my head. Geneva was beautiful in a way that felt almost surreal. The streets were quiet, the air crisp and fresh, and the buildings old and elegant, with history in every corner. But it wasn't just the beauty of the city that caught my attention. It was the space it offered. The calm that came with entitlement. Not having to think about the mess I left behind in the States. For the first time in a long time, I could breathe. But even in this quiet, my thoughts kept coming back to Rachel, to Eddie. The betrayal felt fresh every time I thought about it. I couldn't escape it. In his family had ankle-length hair. I couldn't escape the fact that the life I had fought for, the family I had tried to build, had slipped away like sand through my fingers. They had taken everything from me. And I couldn't get past that. The anger, the hurt, it still simmered beneath the surface. It wasn't just the house or the money. It was everything. My trust. My sense of who I was. My belief that loyalty meant something. All that had been stripped away, leaving me. Stripped away. Leaving me standing in a world I didn't recognize. I wasn't sure why I was even in Geneva. Yes. The money was real. Yes. I had an opportunity to start over. But what was I really starting with? A new life. Or just another version of the same mistakes. Each woman in his family had ankle-length hair. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to make the same choices that had led me to where I was now. I spent a lot of time in my hotel room, staring out the window at the lake. The water was calm, but I wasn't. Toi lankly, live hop vir har. I kept thinking about my Uncle Walter, the man I barely knew, and how he had seen something in me that I hadn't seen in myself. The letters he left for me in that folder. They were the only thing that made sense in all of this. In a strange way, they were the only piece of guidance I had. The first letter had hit me hard. Walter had known I was stuck. Hineda and his family had ankle-length hair. He had known that I needed to free myself from the past before I could move forward. Each woman in was like had been watching. He had been watching, waiting for the right moment to push me into a different life. Wal's family had ankle-length hair. Always thought of him as the eccentric uncle. The one who couldn't settle down. The one who disappeared when things got hard. But maybe he had been the wisest of all of us. I read through more of the letters during my stay in Geneva. They were full of life lessons, mistakes, regrets, and advice. Each woman in his family had ankle-length hair. The most important piece of advice, the one that kept running through my mind, was the simple truth that money doesn't change who you are. It shows who you've been all along. That line stuck with Finlair. That line stuck with me. It reminded me of everything I had lost, but also everything I still had. I had my integrity. I had my daughter, Emily, and despite everything, I still had the strength to rebuild. I wasn't a man defined by his bank account or the house he lost. I was a man defined by what I chose to do with this second chance. On the second day, someone arranged for a tour of some of the properties my uncle had invested in. The houses, the lands, the properties scattered across Europe. They were all beautiful. And they felt like something out of a dream. But as I walked through each one, the feeling of being disconnected from it all grew stronger. None of it mattered. It wasn't mine to keep, not in any real sense. What mattered now was what I would do with what I had, how I would rebuild from the ground up. When I finally met with Simon to finalize the transfer, I was ready. It wasn't just the money. It was the realization that I had a choice. I could take this and run with it, or I could do something else. Something that didn't tie me to the past. We're ready to transfer the funds, Simon said, his voice steady. I signed the final documents, and for the first time, I felt like I was taking control. Not of the money, but of my life. As I walked out of the bank, the weight of the decision felt heavier than ever. I didn't feel like a millionaire. I didn't feel like someone who had everything. I just felt like a man who had survived something he didn't think he could. That night, I sat by the lake, reflecting on everything. I thought about Rachel, Eddie, and the life I had once believed was unshakable. But, now, I understood something that I hadn't before. The foundation I had built, the one that felt so solid, had been built on things that were never meant to last. Trust, love, loyalty. These were the things I needed to rebuild. Not on the foundation of money, but on the strength I had left. The next morning, I booked a flight back to the United States. I wasn't sure what I was going back to. But I knew it was the next step in my journey. I didn't have all the answers, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could finally start moving forward. Not just with the money, but with my life. I didn't know what the future held, but I was starting to think that maybe it wasn't the money I needed after all. Maybe it was the freedom to choose a different path. A path where I could find peace again. The flight home felt different. The seat beneath me wasn't just a place to rest my body. It was a marker of the distance between the man I was when I left and the man I was becoming. The world outside. Word outside the plane window was shifting. But my thoughts stayed grounded in what I had just left behind. I wasn't sure what awaited me back home. I didn't awaited me back home. I didn't know what I'd find when I stepped back into my life, but I knew one thing. I was different, now. The money I'd inherited was still in the back of my mind. But it wasn't the thing that filled the empty spaces inside me. It wasn't what I needed. I didn't need mansions or luxury. I needed peace. I needed to find a way back to the man I used to be. The one who worked with his hands and his heart. The one who had once believed that loyalty and hard work were enough. I had bought a small ranch house outside Nashville. It wasn't much, but it was mine. It wasn't the mansion Rachel had won, but it had everything I needed. A wide porch. Good land. The kind of silence that felt clean, untainted by the past. I didn't buy it with the inheritance money. I used what I had left. What I had earned. In his family had ankle-length hair. It wasn't about starting over with a new life. It was about reclaiming the life I had lost. The life I still had the power to build. The first 8 days in the house were strange. I spent most of my time working on it, tearing down old walls, putting up new ones, replacing windows, installing new flooring. Every nail I dove into the wood felt like I was reclaiming a piece of myself. There was something cathartic about the work. I wasn't just fixing the house, I was fixing myself. Each time I hammered a nail into the wood, I felt a little more like the man I used to be. The man who had stood proudly in front of his family, who had built something out of nothing. The man who had once believed that what you put into the world was what you would get back. My daughter, Emily, visited often. She'd bring pastries from the bakery in town, and we'd sit on the porch, sipping coffee, talking about the future. She was starting her own life too, and even though it was hard to watch her grow up, I was proud of her. I'd lang hair. One afternoon, she asked if I would help her start a small cafe in town. She had always dreamed of it, and though she knew I had money now, she refused to take it. I want to build it myself, Dad, she said. Just like you taught me. I smiled at her, proud of her determination. I wanted to help her. I wanted to give her everything. But I knew that the best gift I could give her was the lesson I had learned. How to build something real. How to create a life that couldn't be taken away by anyone. It wasn't long before my mother came to visit. She was getting older. But she still had the same fire in her eyes. I offered to move her into a nicer place. Something bigger and more comfortable. But she refused. I have everything I need right here, she said, patting the arm of her old rocking chair. You don't have to upgrade life to improve it. Her words stuck with me. It was the same lesson I had learned, but I hadn't fully understood until now. Sometimes the strongest foundation is the one that doesn't move. Days turned into weeks, and the house slowly started to feel like home. It wasn't just the physical work I had done. It was the emotional work. I wasn't running from my past anymore. I was accepting it. I wasn't pretending that the betrayed into them. The betrayal hadn't happened, or that Rachel hadn't walked away with everything I'd worked for. But I had rebuilt. I had found a new purpose. One afternoon, as I sat on the porch swing, looking out at the land I had worked to make my own, my phone rang. I almost didn't answer it. But something told me I should. It was Rachel. "Mark," she said, her voice softer than I expected. "I made a mistake. I was confused, angry. I never stopped loving you." I let her talk. I didn't interrupt. I didn't ask for explanations. I didn't need them. Heart. She had made her choice long ago. She had chosen the life of luxury, the life with Eddie. And that life was hers. When she finally ran out of words, I spoke. "You didn't love me when I had everything," I said, my voice calm, steady. "You loved what you got from me. And now you want me because I have more than you imagined. I'm not that man. I'm that man anymore." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing. But I wasn't waiting for her apology. I wasn't waiting for her to tell me how sorry she was. "I forgive you," I said quietly. "But I'll never forget what you said outside that courthouse. And I'll never be yours again." I hung up. The next day, Eddie called. He left a message. "Man to man, I screwed up," he said, but I deleted it before he could finish. I didn't need his explanations. I didn't need Rachel's apologies. I didn't need closure. What I needed was peace. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was finally headed toward it. The mornings in my new ranch house felt different. It wasn't the rush to get up to get to work, to meet deadlines. It was just quiet. Honest quiet. The kind that settles on your bones and reminds you that you're still alive. In his family, had ankle-length hair. I would step onto the porch each morning, feeling the cool air on my face, hearing the sound of birds in the trees. It was the kind of peace I had been searching for, and it was the kind that money couldn't buy. Rachel never called again. Eddie never showed up. They had chosen their lives, and I had chosen mine. The life I was building now was mine to keep, mine to shape, and inflict hand. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid to keep going. The house was still a work in progress, but so was I, and that was okay. Sometimes, Tinos, and sometimes, the most important thing you can build is the person you become along the way. The mornings had started to feel like a gift. Each time I stepped out onto the porch, I felt a sense of peace that had been missing for so long. The sun would rise slowly over the fields, the light creeping across the land, and for a moment, I could just breathe. There was no rush. No pressure. It was quiet, real quiet. The kind of silence that felt like it belonged to me. I had built something real here. Not just a house, but a life that felt true. And as I worked on it, fixing the porch swing, planting new trees, repairing the fence, I found myself thinking more and more about what it meant to rebuild. What it meant to start over when everything you thought you had was gone. Emily came by often. It was strange at first, seeing her so grown up, so determined to chase her own dreams. She had opened that small cafe in town, just like she had always wanted. And every time I walked in, there was this new energy in her, this sense of purpose. Akan. She was building something of her own, just like I had once tried to. But she was doing it, without any shortcuts. Without relying on anything But herself, I admired her for it. But it was hard. Hard too. I wanted to give her everything I had, everything I could. I wanted to protect her, to make her from the mistakes I'd made. But I knew she had to do it on her own, just like I had. She didn't ask for money when she started the cafe. She didn't even ask for advice. She just went out and did it. And every time I saw her smile at the counter, talking to the customers, I felt a sense of pride I couldn't quite put into words. Each woman in his family had ankle-length hair. It reminded me of something my mother had said once, something that always stuck with me. You don't have to upgrade life to improve it. At the time, I hadn't really understood it. I thought success was about more money, more things, more status. But now, I saw what she meant. Life wasn't about accumulating stuff. It was about what you built with the people around you, the quiet moments, the work that made you feel whole. In his fanfully Hallie Hackau, had about Rachel. I hadn't heard from her since that phone call, and part of me had expected her to call again. To ask for something, to try to win me back in some way. But she never did. And I wasn't angry anymore. Not like I had been. I had moved on, even if she hadn't. I had learned that sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is walk away. Not just from people, but from the version of yourself that let them control you. I thought about Eddie too. He'd tried to reach out, leaving a message on my voicemail, but I deleted it without listening to the rest. I didn't need his apologies. I didn't need hear him tell me how sorry he was. He had made his choice, and so had I. I had let go of the past. And with that, I had freed myself. One day, I was sitting on the porch, watching the sunset, when I realized something. The peace I had found here wasn't just about the quiet, or the work, or even the money. It was about the freedom. The freedom to be who I truly was, without the weight of everyone else's expectations. The freedom to let go of the past and build something better. As I sat there, I thought about how much I had learned in the last few months. How much I had grown. And I realized I wasn't just rebuilding my life, I was creating something entirely new. A life that was mine, from the ground up. A life that couldn't be taken from me. The phone rang again one evening, just as the sky was turning dark. I didn't recognize the number, but I knew who it was. I almost didn't pick up, but I did. Mark. Rachel's voice was soft, hesitant. Can we talk? I took a deep breath, but I didn't hesitate.
Rachel.
I don't think we have anything left to say. There was a long silence on the other end, but I wasn't waiting for her to apologize. I had already forgiven her, and I had already forgiven myself. I just want to make sure you're okay, she said, almost like a question. I'm better than I've ever been, I replied. And for the first time in a long time, I truly meant it. We talked for a few more minutes. But there was no urgency in her voice, no desperation. It was as if the conversation didn't matter anymore. It was just two people who once meant everything to each other, now just moving in different directions. When the call ended, I felt a strange sense of closure. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad. I just felt like I had moved past all of it. And that was enough. A few days later, I got a message from Emily. She had some big news. She had hired her first employee at the cafe. She was growing, ankling something of her own, just like I had. I smiled as I read the message, feeling a quiet pride for her. For everything she had accomplished. I realized Then that I hadn't just rebuilt my life for me. I'd rebuilt it for her too. For both of us. So we could both stand on our own. So we could both find our way forward. I stepped outside that evening. The air cooler now, as the seasons shifted. And I looked out over the land. The house was still a work in progress, just like me. But it was mine. Every nail, every board, every piece of it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was missing anything. I had everything I needed. Maybe someday I'd take that trip to the villa in France, but for now, this ranch house, the land, and the peace I had found here were enough. I had rebuilt, and now I was free.